Hello, welcome to How to D&D. Let's see how my voice holds up. We're going to talk about the Herbalism kit. I've done plenty of research, and surprisingly there is some information, possibly not as much as a lot of people would have liked. That is kind of a product of anything that I do on YouTube. I've always found that there's usually something, but never necessarily definitives about everything. Okay, this is going to be one of those times where I can give you specific information, and then I'm going to have to refer you on to a different location, or I have to make things up a little bit to sort of fill in the gaps, because there are probably gaps here that people don't want to have in their game. So get some food, drink, make sure you are comfortable. How's it going, Scott? Yes, we've got it all ready. Let's make sure it's going to work for you. And we'll talk about the Herbalism kit. Hi, welcome to How to D&D. My name is Fred Weller, and today I want to talk about Dungeons & Dragons 5e. Now, we're not specifically talking about herbs, because what we're talking about are plants, flora, things that you would normally sort of come across in your adventure. This is quite common. So this is how to use the Herbalism kit in your Dungeons & Dragons 5e game. It's one of those topics that frankly I find difficult to get my head around, because it is scattered. The information is scattered all over the place. It's not in one location. If you were going to actually look for anything, you would have to use at least 3 books to source everything, and then you're probably going to have to rely on older versions of Dungeons & Dragons to actually fill in the gaps. So therefore, there's a lot of work involved in actually making this work. And not only that, you can't really go into a lot of detail because there's so many plants and so many herbs. And so therefore, what can we do? We can only do the best we can, and that's exactly what my intention is today. We are going to cover as much as we possibly can. The application of the Herbalism kit has been left open to interpretation. One of the things I certainly noticed. Then I would also say it has also been left to the Dungeon Master to have discretion around how the Herbalism kit will be used. But apparently it can do quite a lot. So what does this mean for Dungeon Masters, but also for players? Because this is a guide for Dungeon Masters and players, so you know what you can do with this thing and what you might sort of want to try with this and see how your Dungeon Master reacts to that. So I'm going to go through quite a long list and then break it down as best I can, and then you will make the decisions about what you think you will going to include in your game and what's going to be appropriate for you. So proficiency with the Herbalism kit allows characters to identify plants. So does that mean that if you are not proficient in the Herbalism kit, you can't identify plants? Well, yes, that's pretty much what it's sort of saying. That doesn't mean that a Dungeon Master couldn't change that. They could say, look, yes, you could have a Herbalism kit, you're not proficient with it, but you can identify some very common plants or herbs or whatever it is, or trees, things like that. And there's probably no dice roll involved, or maybe there is. It's up to you. But basically what it's suggesting is that to identify plants, trees, herbs, shrubs, that sort of thing, you are going to find yourself needing to be proficient in the Herbalism kit. But what does that ultimately mean? What are we going to do as a Dungeon Master to represent that? Is the Herbalism kit just going to be another way to get the benefits of being proficient in nature? And I think that is probably the intention. I think the intention is that you use your proficiency with the Herbalism kit to transfer over to the nature skill check. So if you're using nature as a skill check to identify any kind of plant, that's probably what you're trying to do here. So I would say yes, that's probably exactly what we're supposed to be doing. Does that mean you get advantage on nature or survival checks and or proficiency to your checks when identifying plants? Now, I'm not suggesting that if they're already proficient in nature that you allow them to stack their proficiency twice because they have proficiency in the Herbalism kit. That's up to you, okay? What I'm suggesting to you that there are alternative tools. If you don't want to give them double proficiency or a double proficiency bonus to their nature check or any kind of survival check, if they're already proficient in that, because of the Herbalism kit, you can use another mechanic, and that is advantage. Now, whether you use that exclusively or whether you allow that as well as the proficiency, that's totally up to you. But I think the intention is behind getting the Herbalism kit, since it's actually not that easy to get proficiency in the Herbalism kit, apparently, that's probably the intention behind that. But that is left completely up to you as a dungeon master. So hopefully that gives you some idea of what to do with that. Now, there's another way we want to think about identifying plants, and that is, what about no knowledge check being required to identify plants? You know, you don't require any kind of skill check to identify plants. I would say to you, you could certainly apply that to some common plants or things that aren't really rare or very unusual. And I think that's probably where we're trying to go with this concept. The character with training in the Herbalism kit can identify most plants with a quick inspection of their appearance and smell. And that's actually stated in, I believe it's Xanathar's Guide to Everything. So I think the intention is that they don't necessarily need to make a skill check to identify stuff. So what are we going to do with that? So consider a nature check or a survival check if you're using that, with a DC of say 5, 10 or 15 to identify plants to have automatic success. Now, the other thing I know that people are going to ask me is, so what are the DCs for different plants? Look, there are so many different plants. Plants, trees, shrubs, herbs, all that sort of stuff. It would be impossible and impractical for anybody to give you a list unless they wrote a book of all the plants, trees, and herbs that are available in the world, and then to give you a DC for actually identifying them. I think that's probably going way too far. So you need to sort of cool it a little bit with the idea that you're going to get exact numbers on that, because I'm not going to give you exact numbers on anything like that whatsoever, which is unusual because usually I would do that sort of thing. I'm going to give you numbers for other things, but not for identifying a vast array of millions of different plants. Now, to identify a plant as poisonous with proficiency in the Herbalism kit means you can do this, but the DC is 20. It's a nature check, it's a DC 20 to identify a plant as being poisonous. Now, if the DC to identify the plant full stop, okay, is greater than 20, say it's 25 or 30, then we're probably dealing with a plant that the individual doesn't know. So I'm assuming that you're probably going to have to identify the plant first before you can determine whether it's poisonous or not. So we're looking at a series of skill checks. So identify the plant and then determine if it's poisonous or not before we touch it. And that's what the DC 20 nature check is all about. So you do get a definitive number in some cases. And that is actually spelled out in Xanathar's Guide. So proficiency with the Herbalism kit allows characters to safely handle a plant's useful elements. Now, when I saw this statement in Xanathar's, I was thinking, okay, so what does that mean? What are the plant's elements? Is there a list? So I had to break that down, did a little research. Shouldn't be too hard. So the plant's elements are the roots, the stem, the flowers, the leaves, any kind of seed pods or pods, seeds, sap, thorns, bark, spikes, and needles. I think that pretty much covers every aspect of a plant. If you were wondering what we're talking about, those are the things we're talking about. And of course, not all plants have every aspect or element that I've just talked about. So it's up to you to determine how that's going to work in your game based on the nature of the plant they're dealing with. Do you really want to go into this level of detail? I do not know. That's up to you. You run your own game the way you want to. I'm just giving you the tools. So What about the poisonous effects and injuries from, say, a spike? Okay, so one of the aspects to that statement is that you can safely collect the plant's useful elements. So I'm assuming that that means that any kind of poisonous effect, any kind of injury from spikes can be avoided while collecting them from the plant, even if you don't know if the plant is poisonous or not, because you've got gloves and you've got clippers and you've got other ways of handling it. So you would know how to handle plants without coming in contact and getting injured or poisoned from them, even if you're unaware whether they're a poisonous plant or not. I'm assuming that's what they're talking about, because it's a very general statement and it's pretty broad. Okay. The Herbalism kit includes the following items. There are pouches to store herbs, there are clippers, there's leather gloves, there are several glass jars, there's a mortar and pestle, so you can crush things up and so forth. So the basics for actually doing any kind of collection. Now, I'm assuming you would probably also need to have other types of tools or materials to actually combine herbs, plants, vegetable matter, tree matter, stuff like that. But given that it's not like, herbalism has been around a long time, so I'm assuming that these are the basic tools required. You probably also might need a knife. I would think a dagger was probably suitable. A dagger or some sort of knife to cut things up, or to crush them with the side of your blade. Okay, so even though it doesn't say anything about a blade or a knife in there, I would assume that somebody who has a Herbalism kit and is proficient also carries with them a dagger or a knife of some kind. So the Dungeon Master can assume, I think, that there are basic herbal components already stored in the kit, and that they get replaced during downtime activities possibly, while adventuring in suitable locations. So if you have a Herbalism kit, it would make sense that the character might say, look, I want to collect up some herbs in this area. These grasslands have got lots of stuff, or in the forest, anything that I think would be useful, I will, as we're going, I'm going to collect them up on my adventures, so that I don't need to go and use downtime, particularly with a campaign or adventure where you don't allocate downtime, because I know a lot of Dungeon Masters don't do that, or requiring them to go to a shop to buy supplies. Now, there might be some things they have to buy supplies for, but I think we can sort of write that off as they collect these things during their adventuring day. Okay, during their time adventuring, they do those sorts of things naturally, simply because that's sort of part and parcel of being proficient with a healer's kit, to make sure you resupply things. It's like sharpening your sword. If you are a sword-wielding character, you would sharpen your sword. You would not let it get blunt. Would that make no sense whatsoever? It'd probably make no sense to me. So I just wanted to cover that because I knew that somebody's going to ask that question. The character's knowledge of nature and uses of herbs adds insight into the magical studies that deal with plants and attempts to identify potions. Now, this is another statement. I kind of rephrased it a little bit, but it's pretty much the whole gist of the message that I've found, okay? So those are the sorts of things you can do. This is what we do. So what does that ultimately mean and look like in your game for a Dungeon Master or a player? Again, this is another thing where Dungeon Masters will have to use discretion and make a ruling about how they're going to apply it in their game. So possibly we're going to be using the proficiency modifier and or advantage and adding that to Arcana. Now, if they already have Arcana as a proficient skill, you may want to use advantage. If you want to stack proficiency, then you can do that. The same thing would apply to a nature check. You might decide that Arcana is not actually absolutely necessary in this case, and that I'm quite happy for them to use the nature skill or a nature skill check to identify any kind of potions and magical plants. Now, we're specifically talking about potions and magical plants because that's the one sentence we're trying to break down right now. When a character inspects an area of undergrowth or overgrown locations with plants, their proficiency can help pick out details and clues that others might miss. When I looked at this, I was like, gosh, this actually covers quite a lot, but it's hard to pin down what it would be. What would it look like? When a character inspects an area overgrown with plants, their proficiency, so what probably going to be using proficiency modifier on whatever it is, can help pick out details and clues that others might miss. So again, I think we're looking at adding proficiency bonuses to any kind of check. We're probably using advantage again. Now, I would apply this to something like an investigation check, okay, to make any kind of deduction about the plants. So we're transferring proficiency with the Herbalism kit to a lot of different skills. Now, this has already been discussed kind of in the player's handbook, but also in the Dungeon Master's Guide on how to use skills. That, proficiency in a tool or something could be transferred over to different skills, even if the person hasn't actually specifically selected that skill and had proficiency in it. Okay, that this tool is actually being applied across many different skills, but only in set specific circumstances. So only when making deductions about plants, particularly when they're overgrown. Okay, so this could help determine if a plant was planted by hand, if it has self-sown. Maybe there's a plant that is self-sowing. So in other words, you would see the seed pods and the flowers on the original plants that have scattered their seeds and resulted in more plants springing up. If there have been animals going or moving through the undergrown area, so that overgrown area of plants, you'd be able to see sort of that the plants have been knocked around or damaged in some way. You may even be able to pick out footsteps or hoof marks or something like that in that location. Now that means we're looking kind of a little bit at not just nature but survival as a skill, okay? You might even be able to say, look, if someone has hidden something in this location, in this overgrown area, that the person with this proficiency in the Herbalism kit is probably more likely to find it than somebody else. Now, those are 3 examples that I can give you. There are probably far more, and for the life of me, right this very second, I don't know what they are. So I think it's going to be very much a Dungeon Master discretion sort of thing. The character's mastery of Herbalism improves the ability to treat illness and wounds by augmenting methods of care with medicinal plants. So this kind of concept is that, okay, we're now using the Herbalism kit to heal and cure illness. What does that look like? Frankly, I found this particular aspect, and it is actually stated in the rules, and I'll give you all the reference pages. I find this really hard to get my head around. So let's start off with the first aspect of that, and that is what illnesses can be treated. If you are using your Herbalism kit to actually treat some sort of illness, what would you be able to treat? Now, we're talking about poisoning, disease, maybe paralysis. There might be a few other things as well. I'm not going to go into them in a lot of detail. What I'm going to say is I found that trying to apply the Herbalism kit in this way has some problems. It's probably going to step on the foot or on the toes of the lay on hands for the paladin. Now, I frankly think that the paladin's lay on hands feature is outrageously powerful and incredibly useful. So I don't actually have a problem with that. For me, if somebody has the Herbalism kit and is proficient and they're using it in this way and they can get rid of the poison condition and diseases, I would be fine with that. The problem, I think, lies in another aspect of Dungeons & Dragons 5e, and that is lesser restoration. That particular spell can easily be negated completely by the use of the Herbalism kit. So you might want to stipulate that there are certain things the Herbalism kit can't deal with in terms of illness. Now, I think the other thing you need to consider is how long will it take for them to recover? Something like the Paladin can do it almost straight away, right? They just, one action, six seconds, and they've done their job, and they've got rid of that ailment. The lesser restoration spell, it's like an action. So 6 seconds and it's done. So I think if you're going to use this in this way, which I don't actually think is necessarily a problem if you put some limitations in place, but give it a longer time frame. Rather than 6 seconds, it's probably going to take, a few hours or maybe a few days for you to be able to use your herbs and remedies to actually make, or plants and bark and so forth, to actually make anything sort of work for the player character. It's not something they're going to necessarily be able to get rid of straight away. Now, the problem is in Dungeons & Dragons 5e, most things can be recovered by taking a short rest or a long rest. So if you try to make the period of time 1 hour, then it's just going to fall in line with anything that would normally work that can be recovered from in a short rest, which is fine. But if you make it, that it's going to take, it takes like 8 hours, a long rest period, then you kind of like made the herbalism kit and that aspect of it completely pointless. I know this doesn't give you necessarily the answers you want. I just want to ask the question so you understand what you're getting yourself into, okay? Because there's actually quite a lot to consider. There's another aspect to this that I also had to think about, because I knew somebody was going to ask me in terms of curing wounds. And that is, what do we do? Can the herbalism kit restore hit points? I would say possibly, yes. But I would limit it to 1 hit point over a period of about 1 hour of treatment. So they needed 1 hour of treatment to get 1 hit point back. Otherwise, what you're doing is negating the healer feat. There's a feat, the healer feat, that actually does quite a lot. This works quite fast. You can do this in like 6 seconds, okay? It's like an action, or you use a medicine check and, it works quite effectively. So we don't want to step on the toes of that feat. But it also, you don't want to duplicate the stabilizing a creature rules, which basically says that if you're on 0 hit points and 1d4 hours or 1 4-sided dice worth of hours pass, they restore 1 hit point. So we don't want to go 1d4, because that would be exactly the same as a standardized core rule. So it's got to be a bit better than that, which is why I'm saying 1 hour. Okay, it takes a minimum and a maximum of 1 hour to get that job done. We don't want it to work too quickly. We don't want it to take too long. Otherwise, there's no point to it. And it would be only 1 hit point. So it's not game breaking as far as I'm concerned. But it would be certainly very useful if you don't want to wait, 4 hours, particularly if somebody rolls a 4 on the D4 before they wake up. Or you want to restore hit points, but you don't have any other resources. I mean, I don't think this is going to come up that much because people use hit dice. Dungeons & Dragons 5e has potions, it has spells that can restore hit points. You can use a short rest to get them back. You can take a long rest and get all of your hit points back. So you don't want to make it too long a period, otherwise there's no point, based on the existing core rules of Dungeons & Dragons. 5e, that is. Okay. Applying the proficiency bonus to medicine checks and or advantage to a d20 roll or dice roll when using the herbalism kit to cure. So I'm assuming that when you let them do this, that you're going to be allowing them to sort of apply proficiency bonuses to medicine, even if they're not currently proficient in the medicine skill. Because of the herbalism kit, in this circumstance, give them proficiency. Or if they already have proficiency, you can double it. Or you could give them advantage. Any of those things I think would be perfectly fine. Okay. While the character is traveling in the wild, their skill in herbalism makes it easier to identify edible plants and spot sources of food that others might overlook. Now, I have expanded the sentence. It's actually in the book. I think I list 3 books I can't remember exactly which one, but I believe it's either the Player's Handbook or Xanathar's. It actually states something like this. I have just included the word edible because it makes sense to me that we don't want to be chewing on bark. I mean, that's not a particularly edible plant. I suppose at a pinch it will do. So how do we work that out in our game? I'm assuming that when it comes to a nature or survival check, it's going to be improved. So apply proficiency modifiers again to a skill check or advantage to a dice roll when finding and collecting vegetable-based foods. So you could probably feed your party on vegetable plants. If you're not very good at hunting and can't hunt for meat, then at least you will have something to eat. Now, there are different types of environments and terrain, and you might decide that it doesn't always apply to every single type of terrain in terms of using that herbalism kit and that knowledge. And that's fine. It's up to you. Okay, what about finding a plant with proficiency in the herbalism kit? Well, that is actually a DC or difficulty class of 15. It's a 15 nature check. And I would say that's probably for most plants, and it might not apply to a really rare or unusual plant, okay? But that's actually written already in to Xanathar's guide. Proficiency with the herbalism kit is required to create antitoxin and potions of healing. This is really complicated. This is one of those things that often that's why people pick up the herbalism kit, is they want to make potions of healing. So they want to reduce the cost and they want to pump these things out a bit faster. This is often because dungeon masters have made the access of potions of healing harder, or put a bigger price tag on them, or it's not always necessarily that case at all. Sometimes people just want to have that aspect to it, which is fine. I don't think that's actually a big problem. There's, I think, a couple of things to consider, because I found it really hard. I had to look in the Dungeon Master's Guide to actually get my head around how you're going to actually brew potions. These specific potions, okay? These antitoxins and these healing potions. And I needed to not just use Xanathar's Guide. I had to use not the Player's Handbook. I had to use the Dungeon Master's Guide. There are a couple of pages in there that help sort of to determine what sort of things does a character need to make that possible. And as far as I can tell, this is probably where the head of the Dungeon Master design team was going. They will need to have time to do it, because it takes time to actually brew a potion, whatever it is. They'll need the resources, okay, the equipment to actually do it. They'll need money, which might fall under resources, because the concept is that you spend half the worth or value of retail value of the item in materials to make it. So you're reducing your cost by half. So a potion of healing, a standard one, is 50. So it would be 25 gold pieces to actually buy the resources to actually do that. That doesn't mean you're taking 25 gold pieces off the player, and then they also have to have additional resources on top of that. No, that money value is actually part of that. And then there's also talk about a formula or a recipe, so some sort of recipe for actually making this thing. Now that might be something that they normally get or have as a result of being proficient in the herbalism kit. I would assume that the player is probably going to have a character who knows this, because part of studying herbalism is understanding what the recipe is for making an antitoxin, and what the ability to actually make a potion of healing. There's a recipe that they get taught, and so they have that. Okay, so that's all sort of tied in and connected. You need to have a herbalism kit, and you need to be proficient in that kit. Those are things that you'll need. A character will need spell slots in the spell being imbued into the potion. Now that is actually something that is in the Dungeon Master's Guide. So that means that you'll need to have access to something like Cure Wounds or Healing Word, things that would be able to create a potion of healing. Now, antitoxin, is there a spell that allows us to actually do that? Well, yeah, there is. So antitoxin, you might need a spell for that. Now, my understanding is that would be for a magical item. Now, a potion of healing is magical, but is an antitoxin magical? I think it's not. I think it's a mundane item. So I think you might find in that situation, to make an antitoxin, that they wouldn't need to have a spell associated with that, that they would know the recipe and be able to do that without anything else. Now, there's also the possibility that the character might need to be proficient in Arcana, but actually there is some leeway there, because it says in the Dungeon Master's Guide, and or, okay? Really at the Dungeon Master's discretion. So it would be perfectly fine to assume that because in this situation they're making potions, they don't need to already, on top of having the Healer's Kit proficiency, also be proficient in Arcana, because they are proficient in Arcana for the purposes of making potions of healing in this circumstance, but wouldn't be proficient in Arcana for making knowledge checks on magical effects. Does that make sense? Okay. I know this sounds really complicated. I do feel sorry for some of you who have to sit through some of these really dense subjects. Can anybody use a herbalism kit without proficiency? I think that's a question that's going to come up. I'm going to answer that question. I think yes. I think the intention of the design team is yes. Anybody could use a herbalism kit, okay? But they wouldn't be able to do much with it, because you have to be proficient to do all the cool things. Otherwise, you're just carrying around a pack or a kit full of herbs that will help season your food, and that's about it. Okay. So for those of you who are wondering how that might work, that's what I'm suggesting to you. Okay. Now, one of the big questions is, so what's the deal with actually, creating or brewing potions of healing and antitoxin? How much does it cost, and how long does it take? Well, Xanathar's Guide to Everything actually gives us that information. It's actually in the book, but I will discuss it anyway, even though it's in the book. So, 1, if you want to make the time frame for making a standard potion of healing, the one that's in the player's handbook, is 1 day, and a cost of 25 gold pieces, okay? Because the cost of the actual potion itself is 50, so half of that is 25. And it's going to take them 1 working day, which is about 8 hours. Now, I know some people will say, well, actually it would be 4 hours, because would it not be half the, if you can do a full day's work, and you can complete anything that's going to has a material cost of 50 GP, that means it'd be 4 hours. Well, yeah, okay, but it does stipulate in Xanathar's Guide 1 day. So I'm giving you that. If you feel that's not going to work for you, make it for 4 hours. The time to make a greater healing potion is 1 worksheet, or 1 work week. I think it's supposed to be worksheet, but work week, let's say 1 work week, and a cost of 100 GP or gold pieces, okay? The time to make a superior potion of healing is 3 work weeks and a cost of 1,000 gold pieces. If you want to make a supreme healing potion, that's 4 work weeks and a cost of 10,000 gold pieces. I don't know that you're necessarily wanting to make the potions at the higher level. I think you'll find that the standard one is the one you want to stick with, because it makes more sense to me, but that's really up to you. Sometimes at higher levels it's much better to have a potion that does a lot more rather than taking one that does just a little bit. The time to make an antitoxin, if we follow what the standard healing potion is, an antitoxin will take us 1 day and 25 gold pieces. And then you've got them done, plus all the other criteria that I've talked about. So now let's talk about sage advice, because I know people want to talk about sage advice and what has sage advice answered for us. And I would say to you, bugger all. If you thought you're going to get very many answers out of them, you'll be sadly mistaken, because it doesn't work that way. So first off, can proficiency with the Herbalism kit and a successful medicine wisdom check cure disease and remove the poisoned condition? So Mike Mills would allow it, but it's not a standard rule. So I'm putting it out there. It's for something for you to consider, okay? Now, Mike Mills is not the person who deals with rules, and this is a long time ago, but he's the only one who said anything about it. So that's why I'm taking his statement, not Jeremy Crawford's or Dan Dillon's or anything like that, okay? I'm just taking his statement because that's the only thing I could find. Can proficiency with the Herbalism kit allow a character to make potions of healing? Now, we've said yes. But there's something else, and I already did talk a lot about what are some of the things you would need to have to be able to make potions of healing. So the answer is yes, but Jeremy Crawford also states that the kit or Herbalism kit is required but not sufficient to make the potions. You also need access to the spells to heal magically and a few other things. So we kind of answered that question for you. And if you wanted an answer that was specifically from Jeremy Crawford about that, there it is, okay? It is certainly required, but it's not sufficient alone to do the job. So if you as a player are trying to make that work, make sure you have these other things ready to go. And Dungeon Masters, yes, you now have a collection of things you need to tick off as your checklist. Okay, where are the references for everything? Where will you find all the information I've been talking about? So the things that are definitely official and in books, you'll find in Xanathar's Guide to Everything on page 82 and 130. It's there, okay? The Player's Handbook on page 154. And then the Dungeon Master's Guide on pages 128 through to 129. That's it. There's nothing else out there. Everything else I've had to make deductions or certainly just kind of create options for you or make up. There's really nothing else. Now, for anybody who wants the ingredients that you could use for making a healing potion, I actually made a video about that a long time ago. So if you're interested in that, check out ingredients for a healing potion in Dungeons & Dragons 5e, and there's a video that I made specifically on that. So that covers, I think, pretty much everything you need to know with regard to that aspect of the game. Pretty complicated if you ask me. If you like this, that's great. I hope this was useful to you. Players and Dungeon Masters, have a good time with it. Now, one of the other things I probably should have also said and mentioned, and that is, how the heck do you get the Herbalism kit proficiency without being a hermit? You can customize backgrounds, people, okay? Don't freak out. You can customize. It's actually in the Player's Handbook. They're not set in concrete. You can adjust these things. So just take out one of the tool proficiencies and put the Herbalism kit in there. It is not something you need to bust your head around, okay? It will be all right. But if you like this video, great. Now, if you want to support me doing more of these videos, you can. I actually have hundreds of videos for Players and Dungeon Masters, but I have a Patreon page. I have Amazon affiliate links down in the description. I have a merchandise shelf underneath all of my videos, or you can just watch my videos. That's good. That works for me. I'm happy with that as well. Make sure to do all the YouTube stuff. Let's share, like, subscribe, hit the bell button to be notified when I go live. I go live every week, and when I publish new videos. And hey, till next time, keep rolling those 20s. Okay, it's Q&A time. It's time for me to put on my eyes. Let's see if my voice holds up. Look, a couple of days ago I could barely talk. You think it's bad now. You should have heard me before. Overboard DM, Joe, if you're still in the room and still with us, can you please throw in a comment right now and let me know? I don't know if you are. If you are, I would like to hear from you, and I'll explain in a second. Why am I calling you out, Joe? I will only explain if I know you're here. Otherwise, I'll say nothing. Hi, Scott. Scott McLay. Yes, Kingsfoil, all those sorts of things. We've got, is it Breton Elwood? How's it going? Good evening. Hopefully this was the good timing for people. Hello, Tanner. How's it going? Overboard DM. Now that's Joe. Good evening. Yep. How's it going? Hello, Peter. How's it going, Peter? And then we've got Ashton. Acheron. Windspear. Yep. Good morning. Australia. Okay. All right. Good to know. I wasn't too sure if this was going to work for a lot of people, but I thought I'd try a time frame that kind of works for most people, because otherwise, it's a little bit awkward for me, given that everybody's stuck at home now. They're like, we can't go nowhere. It's a little awkward. Right. Always resupply your herbs. Sound advice, Fred. Yeah. I think as a player, if you're playing with a Herbalism kit and that you're proficient, that you just let your dungeon master know that, if I'm in a forest or in the grasslands or in the wild, whenever the opportunity arises, when we take a break or rest, or if I see something interesting, I'm going to be resupplying and cutting new plants off as I go. Does that make sense? Just going to say. So absolutely, Scott. It would apply to tracking if you're studying an area. It could, I suppose. Now, Scott, that's actually a good question. Could the Herbalism kit be wolfsbane is what you're talking about, right? The application of wolfsbane to somebody to get rid of the werewolf curse or infliction or lycanthropy. Yeah. I think that is a dungeon master discretion thing, depending on what they're trying to do with their campaign. So I think for me, that's where people are going with it. Yep. Does that make sense? So yes, I think that would be quite a good idea. It would still require you. I don't think that wolfsbane would be something you would normally carry around in your Herbalism kit. Maybe it is. Maybe you stipulate just in case. But if your dungeon master has built their whole campaign, or probably just their adventure, around searching out and finding the wolfsbane flower, I think it's a flower, it would kind of wreck the adventure. So maybe once you get it, you are the only one that can use that particular wolfsbane to get rid of the lycanthropy. So you are vital in that aspect. Does that make sense? Scott sings Beatles tune Goodberry Fields Forever. Okay. Hello, Mike. How's it going? I'm glad you made it too, Mike. You are here. You made it. Well done. I am shocked to see 33 thumbs up and there are 15 people in the chat. I am a little surprised. Clearly, people want me to keep doing more of these sorts of things. I guess that you guys have nailed it down. If a lot of people watch these sorts of things, I will keep going through more and more tool proficiencies. We did the Thieves Tools, and Herbalism Kit is next. Today, we can certainly look at doing some of the other ones as well. That's not to say I won't cover spells, because I will talk about how to use spells as well. We'll just see how my body reacts to all of this. Don Black, you like the video? Good. Acheron, really to make the most of the Herbalism kit, you may need the brewer's supplies. Now, I think I wouldn't say that see, brewer's supplies are sort of a different thing. What you're trying to do with brewer's supplies, and maybe that's the next video, I don't know. I think what you're doing is you're brewing up alcohol. Do you know what I mean? You're making beer. So I don't know that you necessarily need to have the brewer's supplies as well. I know some people might stipulate that. That's really Dungeon Master discretion. My understanding is, from what I have read and collected, that the Herbalism kit plus the other aspects that I talked about are the requirements that you would need to make potions, all of which are actually certainly within the grasp of most player characters. Hi Daniel, I see you retracted your message. Hopefully you have a question for me, and hopefully it was just an accidental pressing of the buttons on your cell phone or whatever that resulted in you having to retract the message. Okay. I'm already assuming, Daniel, that it wasn't anything horrible or nasty. Okay. All right, Justin. You liked the video, Justin? Okay, well, clearly I'll be doing more of these sorts of things. I see a question from SG. I know. I'll answer that question. Joe, are you in here? Overboard DM. I'm still calling out. See if you're still here. You're not. That's fine. Okay, Mark. Now I can't pronounce that right now. My voice couldn't even handle it. Isn't lycanthropy a curse as opposed to a treatable disease? So yes, but you got to remember that lycanthropy is a curse, but it can be treated with the plant. There is supposedly a point where there's no turning back and you can't treat the individual with lycanthropy if it's taken root for too long. Look, this is a time when you just go and you check out AJ Pickett and his lore videos on lycanthropy to see, because it's not even clear cut, because the lore behind the concept is nebulous in Dungeons and Dragons. It really depends on what you in your world think lycanthropy could be. Just because you're using wolfsbane or a flower of some kind to cure lycanthropy doesn't mean it's a disease. Okay? Remember, a curse can be removed by performing a specific thing. Almost all curses have something you have to do to remove them. And if you can achieve that, the curse is gone. All right. But good questions. What else you got here, Mark? Maybe herbs could keep symptoms at bay until remove curse could be performed. Yes, that's another way of looking at it. Again, this is a Dungeon Master discretion thing. Okay, SG. Evening, Fred. First time DM doing Curse of Strahd. Thanks for your videos. You are welcome. We haven't finished with the Curse of Strahd. I know a lot of you have been wondering why I haven't done the Curse of Strahd live streams. They are coming back. I have pretty much done all of the book reviews that I had planned to do anytime soon. There may be some more in the future as they release new books from Wizards of the Coast, or if I find a book that I think you guys would find useful and I think is worth talking about, or I think you should be warned not to touch. That could also happen as well. But I would certainly be talking more about it. I'm glad you're finding those videos useful. Certainly Lunch Break Hero would be another place to go if you're running the Curse of Strahd. He's more about modifying stuff. I'm really more about giving you options. A lot of my videos are about giving you options that you can use in your game. And that whole intention is going to continue. And pastries, dream pastries may be on the cards. I just have to wait till my brain is working sufficiently that I can produce a video with options with dream pastries that will make sense to anybody else other than just me, or just wind up. I don't want it to come out as being just gobbledygook nonsense. I want it to be something that's good. Okay. Scott, great moments in history. Socrates failed his herbalism check. Yeah, okay. Hello, Daniel. There we are. He's got his comment in. Can the alchemist's supplies improve a potion made from a herbalism kit? Daniel, that would be up to a dungeon master. I think that is something that a dungeon master needs to decide. I don't think there's There's no, I mean, I did see discussions on forums about that, but that's just sort of people just making stuff up, which you can. And in their game, maybe it does. Maybe if you are the dungeon master, it's going to work. If you are a player, you would need to present that concept to your dungeon master and see if they say yes. So I can't answer that. And I have no intentions of doing so. So it's not that I want to ignore your question, Daniel, because it's a good question that I have not addressed for that very purpose. It is something that I should not be taking part in. As somebody who sits on YouTube giving videos out to people about stuff and giving advice. This is one of those times, same as the brewer's kit, our brewer's supplies, should I say. Okay, SG. I've been thinking about player death and Curse of Strahd. Well, I can assure you that I have many videos on character death, and there is one on the Curse of Strahd and death in the Curse of Strahd. And I do not be fooled in thinking that I don't think that characters shouldn't die in the Curse of Strahd, because you are wrong. Okay, I only present options, and I try to test the things that I have done and give them to you. So there is definitely a video on the Curse of Strahd and death, and you probably already watched it. And please remember that, you know, things like dark gifts and the Curse of Strahd are not things you have to use. You can adjust them. I'm going to keep going before I lose my voice, which is going to be very, very soon, and then I will have to go. I also want to say, for those of you who are unaware, I am probably going to do some more Lost Mine of Phandelver videos. I am probably going to do some more Lost Mine of Phandelver videos. Old Al well. If my brain works well enough and I get the information together, I'm probably going to do that. I'm going to probably do some videos on some of the aspects that I should have talked about but didn't want to, because I kind of got a bit Lost Mine of Phandelver run down. The Spellforge. I've been thinking about that too. So those are topics that could certainly wind up on the channel as live streams and as edited content later on. You can tell that my voice is starting to get lost. Jason, would love to see a third-party book, Top X talk review. Your content has been key to my success as a new dungeon master. Okay. So Jason, I did talk to Mr. Torask, but it's just, he's in Belgium and I'm in New Zealand, and the timing is just not very good. What I will say is that I will probably talk about third-party books only when I have them myself and I think they're worth talking about. That's just me. I am the sort of person who tends to sort of try to pick what I talk about if I can, rather than talking about everything. I find that a lot of people who do reviews on books and content tend to try to paint a much prettier picture than the reality of that book, just to get people to buy it. Or understanding that it takes a lot of work to actually make something, and I don't think that's necessarily very useful to people. So Fizzband's book's going to get some treatment. I will talk about The Witchlight. I will probably talk about Strixhaven. And even if I don't talk about Strixhaven, I would imagine that Wally's going to have me talking about Strixhaven anyway. It's going to happen. Okay, what else we got here? Peter, what do you got here? I would allow a Herbalism kit to be used for additional homebrew buffs, as in the case in The Witcher. Minor buffs with side effects. Yeah, that's up to you, absolutely. I'm a fan of Phandelver and would look forward to that. I think a lot of people want me to do more videos on that. I wasn't really too sure if I wanted to do that, but I think I will. But they will be very, very different to what you've seen before. because I've had a lot of time to stew on these things. So I'm probably, I did a lot of NPCs. I'm probably going to talk about locations more than I have in the past. Hi, Daniel. What do you got here? I know this is a bit off topic. What is your favourite monster? My favourite monster is the Mimic, because the Mimic can be anything. That's just me. So hang on, what do we got here? Somebody else has asked a question that's interesting. Yeah, I need to rest my voice, Scott. I absolutely will. And you're welcome. Any recommendations on gaming mats? Look, I've done a review on the Pathfinder flip mat. If you watch that for me is probably one of the best ones, because you can use any kind of pen on it. It's very forgiving. If you balls things up and somebody uses the wrong type of pen on the mat, it doesn't matter. You'll be all right. Something like the Chessex battle mat, not forgiving at all, but I've done a review on that, so you're welcome to go and check that out. AJ Pickett is just about to release a new battle mat that glows in the dark of all things. I can't really comment on that. We'll see how that sort of all pans out. I think the Kickstarter is closed, so I don't think you can get the mat anymore anyway. You can make your own mats. I've got videos on that show you how to make your own mat very cheaply. There's at least 2 videos that show you how to make a battle mat on my channel that you can reuse. So I'm not going to recommend anything else other than that. If you're going to buy something, I still think the Pathfinder flip mat is probably good. But it does have creases in it. There's downfalls to everything. How many potions do you allow the players to make? Well, that's really dependent on time. Remember, it takes them a whole day to do this. So if they don't have some leeway between adventures, they're not going to have time. If you give them downtime, they could make a few, couldn't they? I mean, if you give them 20 days of downtime, they could use all 20 days of downtime and make 20 of them, provided they have enough materials. And it's 25 gold pieces, and they could go to a shop and buy all the supplies they need. They might have to go to more than one shop to buy all the supplies they need. That's up to you as a dungeon master. Christopher, that question is, how long is a piece of string? And a piece of string is going to be as long as you, as the dungeon master, want it to be. And as a player, how many potions can you make? That's how many your dungeon master says he will allow you to do. Or she. Pardon me. SG, laugh out loud, love it. If you ball things up, sounds like me. Yep. Well, that's exactly, it does happen. Trust me, it does happen. Okay, what else we got here? Justin, I personally prefer your approach of giving options to players and dungeon masters. Well, Justin, I am not going to stop that approach. I have tried to say this to people on many occasions when they tried to get definitives out of me, and people have got definitives out of me, but really I am a very specific type of dungeon master. There is the dungeon master who is, you should do it this way. There's a lot of them on YouTube, okay? And in the community. And then there's another one that is, you could. And I am, you could. That doesn't mean, because frankly, I don't give a shit what you do at your game table. Because why would I be invested in that? That's none of my business. I'm going to give you options and explain the consequences of maybe doing that. Pros and cons. I am that sort of person. That's how I deal with things. Because honestly, I don't like the idea that, there are certain things you absolutely shouldn't do. Well, there's certain things you probably shouldn't do as much. But I say try everything at least twice. Everything at least twice. So options is the way to go. Okay, Christopher. Potions getting pretty powerful. I was thinking I'd like to make it easier with Herbalism alchemy, but Hard to know. Look, I frankly don't think that you are going to break the game by allowing players to make potions of healing. I really don't. They've got to use their money on something, and the reality is that if they are investing time and energy into the Herbalism kit, and there's actually quite a few criteria that I talked about. There's time, money, resources, a space to do it, the equipment, all those sorts of things. I would just let them do that. Okay? If anything is going to break the game, it is going to be healing word, that spell, because it's a bonus action. It takes a action to pour a potion of healing down somebody's throat if they're unconscious. I'm fine with that. Okay? This is what we used to do in older versions of Dungeons and Dragons. We would stock up with as many potions of healing as we possibly could. And if we could brew them, then we did that as well. But again, that is up to you. If you're a dungeon master, you decide all of that. Okay? Okay. I am very much going to have to go in a second, people. Otherwise, you'll never see me again. Okay, so, I want to be able to come back. Okay, Justin. Agreed. Too many others have the attitude that they modified and therefore fixed the module D&D, which I find a bit eager. Yeah, okay, a bit pompous. Yeah, I understand what you're talking about. Yeah, I get it, Justin. I absolutely do get it. It is always it's always about options as far as I'm concerned. Okay, Mike, what do you got here? Agreed, but I also like to get a lot of people's opinions on fixing things so I can just take what I like from their ideas. That's fine too, absolutely. Yep, okay. I don't know when you'll see me again. I suspect I'm going to try to let my voice recover before anything else happens. I think that we have certainly covered this topic pretty well. We'll see how my brain works and how well because I'm on holiday. So I do want to actually take some time to sort of take a break. So if you don't see things show up on my channel, there's probably a reason. But this is a good time to stop. So thank you, everybody who showed up for this live stream. Thank you to my patrons who continue to support me in making videos. And, my patrons almost never ask me to make anything specific. They really don't get anything more than the written scripts of my videos and a lot of the content that I have made that I haven't published. They see that in advance. And yes, you will start seeing Dungeon Master Roundtable discussions. They're going to come. I have a lot of them. I just haven't released them. It has taken me ages to cut the heads off AJ Pickett and Dungeon Dad and Wally and a few other people. And I'll tell you, man, it is complicated stuff. But once I figured that out, that makes it certainly much easier for me to start releasing those videos with a thumbnail. Ah, dear. I'm going to get into so much trouble. I can just see it now. So there's a few people who are going to show up on the channel very, very shortly from other channels, okay, that you are probably very familiar with. But yeah, thank you to my patrons who keep supporting me and very rarely ask me to do anything additional, which I would never be able to do anyway. And thank you for watching my stuff, because I do appreciate it too. That really does make a big difference. So wherever you are in the world, whether it be the morning, the afternoon, the night, or the early morning, please look after yourself, your family, and your friends. Be nice to your neighbours. And hey, till next time, keep rolling those 20s.